Speaker. It's a pleasure to be able to rise and speak about this bill and the light that it throws on the Premier and the way he's going to run this province in the next 4 years. It's very clear to me, and I think it's very clear to the people of this province, that he's abusing his very vast political power in the way he's dealing with the City of Toronto, with the region of Niagara, region of York, Peel, and Muskoka. He's acting like a dictator. This is an extraordinary approach to the way one exercises power in a democracy. He cooked this up in a back room. He consulted no one, and frankly, he did campaign.
Recognize the member from Eglinton Lawrence on a point of order.
Madam Speaker, the member opposite used the word dictator, which is abusive and insulting language, and earlier today that same word was...
Ask the member to withdraw.
Withdraw. Okay. So, what do we have before us? A bill that I think would be more appropriately titled the Rollback Democracy in Toronto, Peel, Niagara, York, Muskoka, and Throw Your Weight Around Act 2018. That's what we got on the table. And there are a variety of things I want to touch on, but I'm going to talk about the content of the bill first. And I need to, when I do that, acknowledge the researchers who did this work. Bilbo Pointer did great work in a very short time, and I have to say, when things go well, we have to recognize that the researchers make us look good. When things go badly, we have to acknowledge it's our fault because they tried to correct us in the first place. So, my thanks to them. Again, this is a caution. When I was new here, I used to go into the details of bills, going clause by clause, and frankly, Speaker, you have to caution after I do that, because it's simply dangerous. Those of you who are driving home tonight, take a little coffee after you hear my speech. I'm not going to go into every segment of the bill. I think the minister and the parliamentary assistants touched on it. I might have done a bit more, but I'm not going to go into every section. I do want to speak about some elements. Bill 5 amends the City of Toronto Act 2006, the Municipal Act 2001, I know you remember that one, and the Municipal Elections Act 1996, as well as provides, and this is important, provides the Minister of Housing and Urban Affairs the ability to further amend this act through regulation. Now that's really unusual, because those of you who understand the way we write laws here, we write the legislation that sets the framework within which regulations are written. And often, when a government acts in a way that's outside the law that's been written, ultra vires is the term, when it's outside the law that's been written, the regulations are struck down. But in this, we have an inversion. In fact, the minister will be able to write regulations that will supersede any act that we put forward in this House. So the debate you're having today, frankly, you can debate it, we can go into committee, we can try and amend it, but the minister will be able to rewrite this act much as he wants. This is quite an extraordinary thing, and I actually had a chance to talk to our House Leader about that, a parliamentarian. I don't think we've seen this before. Maybe I'm wrong. It's highly unusual. But I want to say to you, not only is this a bill that rolls back democracy in the jurisdictions that I listed, but it also undermines your power, our power as legislators, to actually determine what goes out and what exists on the ground. It's an extraordinary piece. Now, I know that when the minister can do this, it opens the door to those famous overnight regulation writing binges, where you see crates of scotch and coffee going into the minister's office, where they're going to go overnight and rewrite the legislation because, they feel like it. That's a real problem. I don't think one-man rule is a good idea. I think having debate out in the open amongst legislators, where the public can hear the arguments that are made, and, assuming you have consultation, can come and speak about what's there. And when you close the door to that, you open a very, very dangerous precedent. A very dangerous precedent. Now, there's one generous interpretation to this. When the Attorney General, lawyers got the grease-stained napkin from the Tom Jones Steakhouse with all this written on it. They couldn't make it all out. They knew there might be problems when they wrote it up. So they took down what they could and realized we got to throw this in case there's stuff we don't understand, in case there's a snag that can be corrected by the minister. That is the most generous interpretation I can give. There's another interpretation in that a lot of games can be played when vague legislation gives a lot of power into the hands of one man. That is a problem. That is a problem. Schedule 1 of this brief bill amends the City of Toronto Act and strips the City of Toronto's ability to determine composition of City Council and the division of the city into wards. Now, no surprise, that's his direction. But beyond that, he's saying not just this election, but in future the City of Toronto won't have the power to set its wards. Gone. One of the largest governments in Canada. You know, bigger than a number of provinces, not exactly amateur hour. A government that was given the power to determine its structure is being told not only not this time, not in future. Forget it. It's interesting to me because I hear regularly from the other side these complaints about the nanny state. The nanny state. Higher levels of government are trying to tell us how to live our lives. Well, the nanny has spoken. And when it comes to Toronto, you naughty kids, God, how is it that you divided up those toys and didn't talk to us first? Well, from now on, we're going to tell you how to divide up those toys. Be sure of it. You're not going to be heard from again because we get to call the shots. Not a democratic approach. Now, even then, a nanny does have some limits, Speaker, and those limits express themselves in Schedule 2. I know you've all read Schedule 2, the racy parts, the fascinating parts. No. Schedule 2 is a whole other thing. You've got to read it to appreciate it and let it soak into you. It provides that for the 2018 regular election, the head of council of certain regional municipalities shall be elected by a general vote. You understand that, Speaker. And that section is reenacted except for a number of municipalities. Niagara, Peel, Muskoka, York. No, that's not reenacted. They are going to go back to appointments. And I'm going to speak about Niagara shortly. But interestingly, that section lapses. So after 2018, even though this time the Premier is acting in a way towards those who are running those races in a way that I will describe later, after 2018, those regions can write their own rules and say, we're going to have an elected regional chair in the future. So, the nanny, when it comes to Toronto, you know, it's an unruly place. What are you going to do? You got to take it over. But for these regions, this is a one-time only offer. Yeah. So, we're going to have this sort of drive-by beating up of Patrick Brown in York. Not that I'm a fan of Patrick Brown. I would have worked very hard to defeat him in the last election if he'd been the leader. But frankly, going in and changing the regional government to get at the guy is an extraordinary thing to do with provincial power. And then Steve Del Duca in York. Steve and I fought regularly. He's not here, so I don't have to call him by his riding name. Steve and I fought all the time. But using the power of the province to do in those two politicians is an extraordinary abuse of that power. An extraordinary abuse. Now,
I recognize the member from Eglinton Lawrence on a point of order.
On a point of order, Madam Speaker, again, the member opposite is using his opportunity to speak to impute motive, which is under 23A.
Thank you. I appreciate the point of order. I will caution the member to choose his words wisely. Back to the member.
Thank you. I want to speak a bit about Niagara region because I'm from Toronto. I know a bit more about Toronto. But my colleagues from Welland, from St. Catharines, from Niagara, they're dealing with a big issue as well, a very big issue. Niagara Region was slated to directly elect their regional chair for the first time. This government stripped the people of Niagara of their democratic choice, of their democratic voice. Many in Niagara were looking forward to the election of the regional chair. Members of Niagara have brought to my attention there's been an ongoing problem and disagreement at the regional level, a real divergence of opinions on the direction of the region. How do you solve that? Well, typically in a democracy, elections seem to be a good idea. You know, I don't know about what everyone who's elected in this room thinks, but I actually think elections are a good idea. And so do the people of Niagara. So do the people of Niagara. And so the people of Niagara had a diverse choice in candidates. I'm sure it was all over the political map. They were going to make a choice in what direction they felt was best for their community. But not anymore. Not anymore, Speaker. With no notice, the government has stripped them of this election. Beyond not notifying the province, they made the announcements the morning of the deadline for nominations. How do you actually run elections when you're changing things so late on? I mean, this is an extraordinary thing. Those candidates had a very tough time deciding where they were going to go. I don't think people's main concern is what happens to candidates, frankly. It's just not on their radar. But in terms of democratic choice and direction in Niagara, this was a really, really bad decision. It's a major step backward for the Niagara region. There are about 500,000 people who live in Niagara. They deserve to be able to make a choice. That is being taken away by this Premier. So I stand with the people of Niagara, and I encourage them to fight, and I encourage this government to withdraw this anti-democratic bill and actually respect the people of the region. And I note the point that I made right at the beginning about the minister having power to write regulations to overturn what we will debate here in the legislature. Well, it applies to Niagara and these regional races as well. It's quite an extraordinary piece of legislation. Noteworthy, very noteworthy. You have to say, Speaker, when you look at this kind of action taken against these regions, that this is a directed political measure. It is not a measured, thoughtful way of dealing with a problem in a democracy. It's a way of getting at people you don't like and making sure that they're out of the picture. Now,
I'm going to ask the member to withdraw.
Withdraw. So, in Toronto, the Premier has announced that he intends to slash the number of councillors on Toronto City Council from 47 to 25, as well as cancel those other races. That race is already well underway. People in Toronto went through a 4-year process of consultation, and I'll touch on that later, because in fact the former mayor of Toronto, Rob Ford, initiated that project of consultation. He thought it was a good idea that we decide how many people are needed to run this city. Amazing, eh? So, news broke, was it just last Thursday? Hard to imagine. Last Thursday evening. And the reason that the Premier gave was to reduce the size of government and end a culture of misuse and waste. Now, for someone who wants to spend $30 million on a legal action against the federal government, when his Attorney General in a press conference today could not say yes to the question, do you think you can win? Didn't even say maybe. No, didn't go to maybe. That was too strong. Would not answer the question. So $30 million, folks, being blown on this legal action that is going to wind up in the ditch. 30 million. That's waste and abuse of cash. That is waste and abuse. So, we had...
Order, please.
We had a small group on the right flank of Council, Toronto Council, holding a press event on Friday and again on Monday, where they supported the Premier's decision. It was pretty clear that at least Michael Thompson knew on the Thursday that this was going ahead. Not the rest of us. We don't really count because we're just elected representatives of the people. But Michael Thompson knew that. Intriguing. fascinating. Two of the councillors appearing with Thompson, Justin DiCiano and Giorgio Mammoliti, appealed an OMB, Ontario Municipal Board decision that upheld the City of Toronto's decision to increase the council seat count to 47 from 44. They appealed it to the OMB and they were rejected. The OMB wrote, the board rejects that public consultation was inadequate. The OMB, pretty conservative body. Yep. Those of you who've dealt with it, you may know it. They're cautious in their language. They're not generally considered friends of local government. They tend to be an obstacle. But in this case, they said, you know, there was evidence that was clear that the 47-ward structure initially recommended was in fact adjusted to reflect input from stakeholders in respective communities of interest. In particular,
Vaughan will come to order.
The rebuke of Mammoliti's do-nothing proposal, the OMB wrote the following. Ultimately, the decision to re-examine the city's ward boundaries is one that lies with council. The OMB was right. It has the ability to review its ward structure as often or as little as it chooses. The city undertook a lengthy, detailed process, incorporating public comment and considered and reconsidered various options. Public and stakeholder inputs were incorporated throughout the process. There was, in fact, a multi-year consultation process, something not happening here. Some people liked it, some people didn't like it. That's the nature of an open society. And in the end, Council adopted a position based on consultation with the people of this city that was upheld by the Ontario Municipal Board against the interests of those who don't like the idea of representation. The OMB ruled to dismiss the appellant's appeal of the Council decision and to uphold the Council, rejected the appeal, upheld the Council decision. Now, who would do something like this? Who would ask for a review of council structure so it was better reflective of the people of this city? Was it David Miller?
No.
No. Did David Miller do this? No, not him. Was it Mel Lastman? No. But who could it be? The mystery. It deepens. Mr. Phillips may know that Mr. Lastman wasn't involved. He would have advised him on this matter. No, it came later. It was 2013. No. It was the Ford administration. No. Amazing. How about that? Whoa! Who'd have thought it? So,
Order, please. Order, please.
So I actually went and looked at the City Council record and the motion of the Executive Committee, which was intriguing. The motion was to set up this broad consultation and assessment. And in fact, it set out responsibilities for those who were going to do the study. So the consultant was to undertake a ward boundary review for Toronto that is legally robust and will withstand legal scrutiny and possible appeals to the OMB. Well, apparently they did that.
Imagine.
Implement a two-stage broad engagement and consultation strategy with the Toronto public, communities, key stakeholders, the mayor and councillors to elicit input on Toronto's current ward boundaries and input on ward boundary options. Apparently they did that because it held up at the OMB. They actually delivered on the instructions given by Mayor Ford's Executive Committee. The consultant will be responsible to undertake a Toronto ward boundary review within the following parameters. Develop a ward boundary review process, work plan and engagement, and consultation strategy that does not assume a predetermined number of wards or specific boundaries of wards for Toronto. So they didn't say, you got to take it up, you got to take it down. Come back with ward boundaries that reflect the needs of the City of Toronto and applies the principle of effective representation as outlined by the Supreme Court of Canada and applied by the courts and the OMB in developing ward boundary options. Well, I think they did that. They were given instructions to look at what would work for the City of Toronto, and they were told to go out and consult. Make sure that this is something that reflects the will of the people of Toronto. The will of the people of Toronto. And they did that. And so Winter of 2013-14, consultant brought in a report, work plan, and then 2014-2015 ward boundary review process started, the two-stage consultation going on, and then in spring of 2016, council considers the final report. So we're talking 2013 to 2016, 2017, roughly 4 years, right? Tell me if I'm wrong, members of the government side, but I expect you're going to wrap this up in a few weeks. Yeah. So 4 years of consultation with the people of Toronto in an open process meant to elicit from them what they wanted in the way of representation, one that was challenged by those who were unhappy with it. They were rejected by the OMB. We had a decision that most people would consider democratically arrived at and democratically representative, being thrown in the trash. That's an extraordinary thing. That's an extraordinary thing. It was not a job creation plan. It was meant to deal with adequate representation of the people of Toronto by their elected representatives. And that's what we have here. That's an extraordinary thing. That's extraordinary. Being thrown out. Being thrown out on a whim. Actually, more than a whim, Speaker. I will go into my assessment of why this is happening as I get further into my speech. So, rules and legislation governing this. City of Toronto is legislated primarily by the City of Toronto Act. Most other municipalities primarily governed by the Municipalities Act 2001. So those bills are going to be amended. Now, we know that notwithstanding the OMB ruling, that ultimately the province has jurisdiction, it has power over the City of Toronto. One should always exercise power carefully. You never know what's going to blow up when you exercise it badly. But it's pretty clear the province has power. I'll note, though, the City of Toronto Act 2006 contains a set of governing principles committing the government to maintaining a cooperative relationship with the city and provides that this relationship be formalized in a written agreement. And I'll just read from that agreement. The province of Ontario endorses the principle that it is in the best interests of the province and the city to work together in a relationship based on mutual respect, consultation, and cooperation. Who would argue with that? Put up your hands if you don't think there should be a system of consultation and cooperation. I mean, come on. I look forward to people saying that's bad news. I generally think that in dealing with municipalities, provincial government should work with them in a consultative and cooperative way. Yeah, you know, like Parry Sound, you know, take your Owen Sound's a great place, wonderful place, I have to say. Yeah, but you'd want consultation, cooperation, dealing. So, for the purposes of maintaining such a relationship, it is in the best interest of the province and city to engage in ongoing consultations with each other about matters of mutual interest and to do so in accordance with an agreement between the province and the city. We actually have in the Act not a requirement to consultation, but an agreement between the province and the city that there will be consultation and cooperation. Thrown out the window. Irrelevant to this government. Irrelevant. Oh, I'm going to speak about consultation further. I appreciate that. But not only was there an extensive process with the citizenry, there was an agreement between the province and the city for ongoing coordination, consultation, cooperation. Not happening. Not happening. There was no consultation on the bill before us, and there may be none. And there may be none. I look forward to seeing whether time allocation is brought in. Some of us will not be shocked if it is. I think you're wrong to do it, but I don't think you're going to consult. I don't think you're going to go anywhere near what the City of Toronto did with its citizens, because you don't have an interest in it. You've shown no evidence of such interest. You know, Speaker, we in the last few weeks have been seized with the debate about the sex ed curriculum. And I've listened to the Premier and the Minister of Health and the Minister of Education speak at length about the reason we're throwing out sex ed curriculum meant to keep children from being sexually abused, meant to ensure that we could prevent depression amongst LGBTQ youth. We've been told that no, you can't go there because there was a bad consultation and we're going to throw it out and we're going to go on a consultation for an unspecified period of time. Unspecified. Biggest ever. Yes, sorry. Thank you. Biggest ever. But when there actually is a lengthy consultation by a city government with its citizens, that gets thrown out in a heartbeat. No problem. So, the cover being used for sex ed is a very thin cover. In fact, it's saran wrap. One can see through it. One can see through it. Speaker, I would oppose this bill even if it was being set in place so that it would have effect in the elections 4 years from now. I would oppose it because I don't think it makes sense. But that's not what is happening. In fact, what's happening is a disruption of an election process that is already underway. Underway. Because I have been canvassed at my door by candidates already. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. I'm very appreciative of the fact they're out on the street and talking to people now. You got to do it. And so it's an extraordinary thing, and it would be extraordinary in Ontario if the federal government stepped in when we were in the middle of an election and said, you know, we're going to change it all today. Change it all today. Shows utter, total lack of respect for the people of Toronto. Now, Speaker, I know my time is short, but I know I get more time next week, and I'm looking forward to that. I had an opportunity earlier today when we were debating our leader's motion on rejecting this bill to talk a bit about what are the motives here. And I gather there's some sensitivity in my talking about the motives. So I will just note, there are two books that I urge every member of this legislature to read, and I urge those who are watching today that they read Crazy Town by Robin Doolittle, and they read Mayor Rob Ford, Uncontrollable by Mark Toohey. Now, Robin Doolittle is not as sympathetic to Mayor Ford as one might want if one was in favor of Mayor Ford, but it's still a fairly good journalistic piece. And Uncontrollable, Mark Toohey, let's be gentle, Mark is no lefty. He's a bright guy, and frankly, after I read the book, I thought, this is the guy I'd like to talk to someday. But he has a very clear-eyed assessment of what went well and what went wrong in that administration. And frankly, those who want to understand how this Premier is dealing with the City of Toronto would be well advised to read those books, to see how power is used and abused and abused. Because one can only think that the ego of this Premier was deeply damaged by his experience with Toronto City Council. Why else would you do this? Why is this a priority, frankly? Why would this be a priority? You know, when the City of Toronto was dealing with the chaos of the Ford administration, the mayor of the time and his brother, who, when you read those books, you can see was deeply integrated into the decision-making, and deeply integrated may be an understatement. Those two men were isolated and pushed out by the rest of council. A council composed of people on the right, on the left, and in the middle, because they couldn't stand the chaos. We were getting a reputation globally for chaos. I had friends who were in Uruguay on holiday, and the guy came up and said, "Where are you from?" And they said, "Toronto." "Oh, Toronto, yeah, we've heard about that." Michael Prue, formerly from Beaches, East York, he was in Taiwan, and he picked up the newspaper, and it was a big picture of Doug and Rob on the front cover. Taiwan! Oh no, we hit the big time. So you had a Premier who got locked out by the rest of council who were trying to protect the city. You look like you want to say something, Speaker.
Seeing the time on the clock, this House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. on Tuesday, August 7th, 2018.